You know what's ironic? The person who spent the entire relationship pulling away is often the one who spirals the most after it's over. Not you, the one who showed up. Not you, the one who asked the hard questions, stayed emotionally present, and tried to make it work. But then the avoidant. Why? Because avoidants build a fantasy in their head. A version of you that's always there. A version of love that asks for nothing, waits forever, and forgives endlessly. They mistake emotional distance for power. They think pulling away protects them. They convince themselves they're in control because they don't need anyone. But here's the truth, that control, it's an illusion. And illusions break, especially when they lose someone real. You, the real one. Don't stay forever when you're not fed emotionally. You don't cling and chase. You walk away with your dignity. And that is what sets the spiral in motion. See, avoidants aren't heartless. They're just scared. Scared of needing, scared of feeling, scared of being seen. But when the real one exits their life, when there's silence instead of effort, absence instead of forgiveness, that fear becomes grief. And it blindsides them. They scroll through old texts. They watch your stories but never reach out. They replay the moments where they could have leaned in but didn't. They feel the weight of what they didn't say, the love they didn't show. And by the time they realize what they had, you've grown, you've healed. You're no longer available to the version of them that didn't choose you. That's the spiral. It's not about missing you. It's about realizing they never let themselves have you. So if you're someone who walked away from an avoidant and you're wondering if they ever think about you, yes, they do. Just not in the way you might think. They don't miss the version of you that begged them to stay. They miss the version of you that stopped waiting. And the thing about the real one, once they're gone, they don't come back for breadcrumbs. They only come back for a feast. Avoidants often appear calm, detached, even indifferent during a relationship. They don't chase, they don't open up easily, and they often retreat when emotions run deep. To the person who loves them, it can feel like loving a ghost, someone who's physically there but emotionally miles away. But here's what most people don't see. That emotional distance isn't a sign of strength or peace. It's a protective mechanism. Avoidants are masters at numbing themselves to connection because connection feels risky. So instead of engaging fully, they pull away, delay commitment, avoid tough conversations, or downplay how much they care. While the relationship is happening, the avoidant often convinces themselves they're fine. They tell themselves they're in control because they don't feel too deeply. They tell themselves they're protecting their independence or avoiding drama. But all that detachment, it only works when the other person is still there, when someone emotionally available is still trying, when love is still being offered. But something shifts when that love is removed, when the person who once reached out stops calling, when the texts stop coming in, when the door is no longer open and they realize there's no one left to keep the connection alive. That's when the spiral begins, because avoidants often don't fully process what they had until it's gone. It hits in unexpected ways. A song, a smell, an old photo, or an ordinary moment that reminds them of something they once dismissed. They remember the consistency they used to take for granted, the emotional safety they were afraid to receive, the patience they slowly exhausted, the tiny, loving efforts they ignored until silence replaced them. This is when they start to unravel. The absence becomes louder than the presence ever was. And unlike someone who was emotionally engaged all along, avoidants don't always have the internal tools to handle that flood of feelings. They haven't built the emotional muscles to process loss or sit with grief because they've spent years avoiding those very feelings. And so, the person who seemed the most indifferent during the relationship may now be the one suffering the most. They spiral, not always publicly, but deeply, because it wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they didn't let themselves care. And when the one who truly showed up is finally gone, reality catches up. They realize the real loss wasn't just the relationship, it was the chance to show up fully, and they never took it. Avoidants are often misunderstood as strong, independent people who simply prefer solitude or don't need emotional connection the way others do. On the surface, they seem composed, self-sufficient, even emotionally disciplined. But what's beneath that surface is rarely peace. It's fear. Deep, often unacknowledged fear. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of being seen. Fear of being hurt. And most of all, fear of needing someone and being left anyway. So what looks like control is actually avoidance. What looks like calm is often emotional shutdown. It's a subtle form of self-protection dressed up as independence. For an avoidant, intimacy can feel like a trap. The more someone tries to get close, the more threatened they feel. It's not that they don't want love, they do, but their nervous system interprets closeness as danger, so they retreat, they put up walls, they shut down conversations, they create emotional distance in moments that call for connection. They don't express needs because having needs feels weak. They don't share fears because acknowledging fear feels too risky. So they operate from a space that says, well, I'm fine. I don't need anything. I've got this. But that kind of control comes at a cost. It keeps people at arm's length. It sabotages connection before it can deepen. And it convinces them that the only way to be safe is to be alone. The tragedy is they often don't realize what they've done until it's too late. When the emotionally available partner finally leaves, when the patience runs out, the forgiveness fades, and the space they used to fill with silence is filled with nothing at all, that's when the illusion breaks. That's when they're left with the consequences of their control. Because control wasn't love, control wasn't security, it was a defense mechanism built on the belief that closeness equals pain. And even though it might have protected them in the past, maybe in childhood, maybe after a betrayal, it becomes the very thing that robs them of the connection they crave most. They wanted love without risk, intimacy without exposure, loyalty without vulnerability. But love doesn't work like that. It requires showing up, being seen, letting someone in. When they lose someone who was willing to do all that, and they didn't reciprocate, their carefully crafted illusion starts to crumble. That false sense of control, the pride in being emotionally unbothered, begins to look more like isolation. And underneath that, they're left with the truth they tried to outrun. It wasn't strength keeping them distant. It was fear pretending to be power. There's a specific moment that shifts everything in a dynamic with an avoidant person when the one who always showed up stops showing up. When the partner who used to send the texts, ask the questions, try to fix things, and hold space suddenly doesn't anymore. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's just absence where presence used to be. And for the avoidant, that's when the internal spiral begins. Not because they've been left, but because for the first time, the control they believed they had disappears. Avoidants tend to rely on the emotional labor of their partner to sustain the relationship. The other person is usually the one leaning in, creating the intimacy, bridging the distance. This dynamic allows the avoidant to keep their emotional walls intact while still benefiting from connection. It works for a while until the emotionally available partner reaches their breaking point. Because there comes a day when they realize that love should be mutual, and that waiting for someone to meet them halfway has turned into a slow erosion of their self-worth. And when that person decides to walk away, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, it dismantles the avoidance illusion that they hold the emotional power. They've spent so much time believing they were the one who cared less, who could leave at any time, who was fine either way. But when the one who once cared deeply becomes unavailable, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, energetically, it shakes them. This is different from being dumped. This is about emotional disconnection happening without begging, pleading, or confrontation. The avoidant isn't left with a dramatic scene to dismiss or a fight to blame. They're left with silence, with space, with time to think. And in that space, all the things they ignored or minimized begin to resurface. The dinner skipped, the text unanswered, the emotional moments where they looked away, the love they thought would always be there. And what really causes the spiral is that the person who left didn't chase. They didn't collapse into desperation. They didn't try to prove their worth one last time. They simply walked, gracefully, completely. That kind of exit is hard to process for someone used to holding back, because it reflects the very thing they were afraid of all along, that if they didn't show up, someone else eventually would stop waiting. And now that it's happened, they're no longer in control, they're just alone. Avoidants don't usually grieve out loud. When they spiral after losing someone, it's not in grand gestures or emotional breakdowns others can easily see. It happens in silence, in isolation, often long after the relationship has ended. They may not reach out. They may not explain, but inside, they're battling something they've spent their whole lives trying to avoid: emotional exposure. That's the catch. Grief requires feeling. And for someone who's built an identity around not needing anyone, feeling deeply can be terrifying. After the real one walks away, avoidants start to experience a delayed emotional response. At first, they might act like nothing's wrong. They may even appear relieved or detached. But time does something they didn't anticipate. It removes the buffer of distraction, and as space replaces communication, they begin to sit in the quiet. That quiet becomes loud. They find themselves rereading old messages, revisiting memories they previously dismissed, and noticing the absence of warmth they didn't appreciate when it was right in front of them. They don't always know how to process what they're feeling. They're not practiced in emotional expression, especially not in the language of regret. So instead of saying, "I miss you," or "I made a mistake," they watch from a distance. They lurk on social media. They hold back from texting you at 2 a.m. Even though the urge is there, they think about reaching out, then shut it down, afraid of what might come next. Their pride battles with their pain. Vulnerability feels like weakness to them, so they grieve alone. Avoidants are often afraid to admit that they cared, even to themselves. They spent so much time minimizing the relationship to avoid the discomfort of intimacy that now they have to confront the weight of what they pushed away. And the irony is, they usually do care. They care deeply. They just never let themselves show it until it's too late. They believed distancing themselves would protect them from loss. But emotional walls don't prevent grief, they just delay it. So, while they may never say the words, their spiral is real. It's in the way they pause when they see someone who looks like you. It's in the long silences where they used to feel secure. It's in the memories that won't leave them alone. They're not immune to pain. They're just unfamiliar with the tools to process it. And in their silence, what they're really facing is the cost of not showing up when it mattered. When someone emotionally available walks away from an avoidant partner, it's not just a breakup, it's a boundary. And that boundary doesn't come out of anger or revenge. It comes from clarity. The clarity that love isn't supposed to feel like chasing. That being emotionally starved and constantly questioning your worth isn't romantic, it's exhausting. So when the real one leaves, they don't look back with hope for breadcrumbs. They leave because they finally understand they deserve more than potential. They deserve consistency, not confusion. Avoidants often expect the person they were distant with to still be there. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, to still care, still check in, still leave the door cracked open. They underestimate the power of quiet healing. Because the person who begged for love, who tried to fix things, who once felt desperate for answers, they grow, they stop needing closure. They stop asking why. They start seeing that love is not about proving you're enough to someone who was never ready to receive it. And once that shift happens, the avoidant can feel it. That once open line of emotional supply is gone. The energy changes. The warmth is no longer available. And that's what they miss. Not the arguments, not the pressure, but the part of you that made them feel safe and seen without ever demanding it. They don't miss the chaos, they miss the calm you brought, but they only realize that once it's no longer an option. The real one doesn't come back for breadcrumbs because they've reconnected with their own value. They no longer view love through the lens of scarcity. They've learned that being wanted isn't the same as being chosen, and that love isn't about waiting for someone to figure it out. It's about meeting someone who's already sure. Avoidants often think they'll have more time, that people will always wait, that love will be there when they're finally ready. But by the time they are, the real one is out of reach. Not because they don't care anymore, but because they've outgrown the version of themselves that tolerated less. What was once an emotional craving has turned into a lesson. And now, the person who once would have accepted crumbs won't settle for anything less than a feast. That's the spiral. The avoidant realizes too late that the person they pushed away is no longer interested in being pursued. Not because they stopped loving, but because they started choosing themselves. So when avoidants lose the real one, they don't just lose a relationship. They lose the mirror that reflected what love could have been. They lose the safety they ran from, the connection they never let in, and the chance to meet someone at the level where true intimacy lives. And while they may not say it out loud, they feel it. They feel it in the stillness, in the space, in the absence of someone who once made them feel deeply without demanding it. But here's the truth, healing doesn't come from waiting for someone to finally choose you. It comes from choosing yourself first, and when you've done that, When you've walked away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving you more, that's when everything changes. Because the real one doesn't beg to be seen. The real one doesn't stay in places where they're only half loved. And once they know their worth, they never settle for less again. Thank you for being here. Whether you're someone who's walked away from an avoidant or someone realizing it's time to stop running from connection. These conversations matter. They remind us that love isn't about chasing or avoiding. It's about showing up fully, honestly, and bravely. If this resonated with you, take it with you. Not just in your head, but in your heart. Because you deserve the kind of love that doesn't ask you to shrink, wait, or prove. Take care of your heart, and thank you for letting me speak to it today.